This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of
enough. You can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price that you can get Truefire All Access for.
At 7 PM tonight, this may have already happened by the time you're watching this video, Eric Klein from Line 6 is going to be talking about announcing or doing something, and it's not exactly clear what that is going to be, but I wanted to make this video just ahead of that around what I think any company bringing out anything that's supposed to be answering the same questions as like the Helix, Quad Cortex in 25, 26, 27 would need to be, I think, delivering in order to add to the digital modeling kind of landscape. I guess you could think of this as like, what is the user expecting in 2025, 26, 27? Not even speculation, really, just about, you know, what would one need to make an impact. You could be totally happy with your existing Line 6 Helix. And actually, I think my major kind of point in this video is going to be that actually these things have sounded really pretty good for quite a while at this point. So what are the big changes that could happen that would really make a difference? And are there any? Whoever is going to be coming out with the next kind of thing. So I think the Fender Tone Master Pro, I think we could think of as like the last flagship model that came out from anyone, you know. And we think about the timeline, I guess maybe Headrush have done something, but I'm not sure that they've made a huge splash. Whether it's Line 6, Fractal, Neuro DSP, whoever, I guess Kemper as well. I guess Kemper Mark II, that should have been a big thing. Anyway, things that I think are going to be needed to not be disappointed with what comes next. In 2015, I think they did change the game in terms of there being like this idea now that you could have, I guess Fractal were really kind of responsible for the first idea, which Line 6 kind of have given credit to, that there could be a modeler that would be kind of more expensive but developed over time, and you create value in the product in that way. But something that would have a bigger colour screen and scribble strips and that sort of stuff. I think that's how Helix has kind of changed the game in that regard. The UI itself was definitely the inspiration for the Quad Cortex, which used exactly the same signal path and same amount of blocks as well, bizarrely. 2015, it still holds up pretty well with competitors in terms of UI. I think Quad Cortex with the touchscreen is basically like a touchscreen version of the Helix. The Tone Master Pro sort of introduces a bit of a new idea here in terms of, you know, users actually feeling like they're tweaking the amp model itself. I don't know if you feel like that's something that might be necessary, but I think now that it's there, people are seeing that as an option. And it's a little bit like, with the future stuff, most likely then, if you're going to have a screen, if you're going to have a colour screen, are you going to expect some sort of real world representation to be on here? Obviously, like Fractal, Line 6, don't do that. Headrush, again, I guess we're kind of ahead of the game in that regard. They've had that pretty much all along. Amplitude as well, right? But that kind of more looks like the signal chain, or maybe even looks like the piece of gear, some sort of visual representation. Is that something that you're expecting people to do with these colour touchscreens or not? I guess, would be the question mark. Now that the Fender Tone Master has done it, I think you could expect that to be the case. The other thing that's happened with the Quad Cortex, I think, is that we've sort of normalised this idea that a device should be capable of both modelling and capture. And this was, up until then, not really the case. Like, the Axe Effects has been able to do some sort of tone catchy stuff, but not really has been like an important part of their selling point. Neural DSP had both capture and modelling, and I think that's sort of like a blend of two worlds that actually makes a lot more sense than having totally separate approaches altogether. And now that we're seeing like Hotone, Moa, and other companies like even Sonicake sort of incorporating NAM profiling into their own modelers to varying degrees of success, but I think that has got to be the next kind of frontier that, you know, these bigger companies kind of have to now contend with. It's like, if you're not going to do it, the other companies are. Can you afford not to do it? Because that could be like the thing that tips someone over the edge between having a device which, yes, it might be great, might have great modelling, but actually this capture sort of stuff capturing quite a lot of interest. So I do think that for some folks that might be an expected move going forward, right? And if I was bringing out a flagship modeler in 2025, 2026, 2027, I think it would be a little bit of a retrograde move to be bringing out something that didn't have that. Similarly, you know, bringing out a modeler which doesn't have a touchscreen, if it's over the £1,000 mark, I think probably seems to me to be like a little bit of a, that's a bit of a risk. So touchscreen probably, colour screen definitely, some sort of capture technology. I think for me personally, it's not something that I use a ton. I think there is a legitimate argument out there to be made that you've got an HX Stomp or you've got a Fractal FM3. If you don't already own a Tone X or a Nanocortex, then I would maybe argue that you've probably made your own case that actually you're fine with just modelling, or maybe this capture technology is not as important as maybe we think it is, or maybe it's presented as. Because yes, for me, in the Fractal world, in the Line 6 world, I am totally happy with the idea that I can just use the inbuilt amp models, and that there'll be enough tweakability in there that I can get a good tone out of there regardless. And actually I feel a little bit less in control of the capture thing in general, whether it's Kemper or Nanocortex. Yes, I can create a capture, but do I always feel like it's better than my actual preset? You know, like if I've got my Eric Lead preset in Helix, which I think of as my tone, when I capture that with Kemper or Nanocortex, I actually lose a fair amount of what makes that tone good. Like, it doesn't capture the fuzzy element of it. It kind of cleans it up and flattens it. So for me personally, that's a question philosophically about whether this capture thing is even that important. But I do think the customer base is saying, yes, that's what we want. Quad Cortex as well, I think, started this idea of bringing these things to be smaller. And I would expect, again, that this is no longer going to be the sort of size that something that comes out in 2025 or 2026 or 2027 is likely to be. I just think that there is this idea now that just because it's powerful doesn't mean it has to be big. And something like the Quad Cortex has really solidified that. And, you know, despite potentially issues around reliability that some people have had and power supply, I do think people have fallen in love with that idea of that being a form factor that could go onto a plane, fly, carry rig, pack it into your suitcase, all of that sort of stuff, and actually be just as powerful as the other devices out there, flagships. So I think that for me is what I'd be expecting. Like, no matter which company it might be, I imagine there's going to be extreme pressure that there'll be a touchscreen. I imagine there's going to be pressure towards having a bit more of a friendly UI, and I think actually this is still where we could make huge strides in the modelling world, because I think these things have sounded really good since Kemper. The Helix has made improvements. Fractal has sounded good forever. I think the areas where there is still like big improvements to be made and big game-changing stuff that could happen is really around UI. And like the Tone Master Pro kind of changes things a little bit there, but I think there's still these ideas like what could you do to make it actually quicker, to actually build tones on your platform and get the things that they want to happen. So I think that's another huge area where, you know, the Helix in 2015 changed the game in that, but I think there's still big strides to be made in terms of so many people are still unhappy and they go, I just struggle with this modeling thing in general. So somehow closing that gap for people where it's like, I've got this tone that I want to hear, but whenever I use these things, it doesn't sound quite like what I wanted. I take them live. I think there's still huge strides to be made there. In A/B tests, yes, I think it's easy enough to get things close enough that you can fool some of the people. But I do think actually there's a bigger win to be had in terms of making these things even easier to use, and not just because they're simple or like watered down, but just in terms of there being like clever ways of doing stuff is kind of how I would put it. Again, also with the Tone Master Pro and the Quad Cortex, I think this idea of actually being connected to your Wi-Fi and this kind of stuff as well. If I was designing a flagship modeler in 2026, 2027, that would be, again, something that I'd be looking at. So I think we do have examples out there already of what the next generation will need to have to make a dent, in my opinion. And I do think that they might actually be quite expensive, this next generation of stuff, because inflation, all of that stuff has happened. You think about like the Strymon Big Sky MX, how much more expensive that was than the first Big Sky. I wonder if some of the next sort of things are going to be a little bit out of reach for some people. And in that case, I would be saying like a Tone X pedal paired with an HX Stomp, essentially, you know, adding this amount of functionality, this capture technology to an existing piece of tech, I think might be just as valid as, you know, buying a new piece of gear, whether that was Tone Master Pro or whatever, because essentially they've not added tons of functionality to like a Helix or like an HX Stomp, right? You know, a Tone Master Pro, Quad Cortex, there's only a few things that they can do maybe differently. They're like sticking a Nanocortex alongside an HX Stomp kind of closes that bridge in some regards, right? Is that a stupid thought? It could be a stupid thought.
But I also don't really think that the next generation stuff, you know, like the Tone Master Pro, when you see actual shootouts with other people's, you know, existing gear, kind of, is it keeping up? In some cases, I feel like it was struggling at the outset. Similarly with the Quad Cortex, I just think this gear that we've already got here, in terms of sounds, is already so good that it's difficult to imagine anything eclipsing that. And that's kind of like a bit of disappointment management that we have to keep in mind, I think.